All right. So we're recording here on Zoom, but we're also streaming this on Facebook. So some of you are here in the Zoom room and some of you are with us on Facebook. And Kylie is here as our intermediary to let us know what's going on the Facebook side of things. Um, I am really excited for this conversation. Jivana, before you hopped on, I was talking about, I've got like a little outline of what, because I'm a scientist.
I'm so
Um,
surprised.
Uh, I'm going to give a little bit of background. I'm not going to give background on the two of us because, hopefully people know who we are. I am Steffany Munaz, founder of Yoga for Arthritis, Jivana Heyman, founder of Accessible Yoga. We both are yogis for many decades, and especially in the space of making yoga accessible and available and welcoming to all kinds of people from all different backgrounds. And I am interested in having this particular conversation with you, Jivana, because it's a passion of mine and I know of yours too, to make yoga accessible. And one of the ways that we make yoga accessible is by diversifying the yoga workforce so that all kinds of people see themselves in yoga teachers, in examples of who practices yoga, what a yogi looks like, right? And what a yogi does. And especially in the West, there are a lot of misperceptions about what yoga is, and especially what yoga looks like and who does yoga that are self-perpetuating, right? The people that you see practicing yoga are the people that then feel comfortable in yoga spaces. So the topic of our discussion is about lived experience. So I want to frame that by just talking about what we mean by lived experience and how you and I started chatting about this. And then I'm interested in some of your thoughts on the value of it. So when we use the term lived experience, which is a common term in the social science literature, especially, it's a particular kind of experience. So you can have experience as a professional, right? So I have been working for decades with people who have arthritis. That's professional experience. Lived experience is when I myself am living the experience of what we're talking about. So I have lots of professional experience working with other people who have, for example, a rheumatic disease. I do not have personal lived experience with a rheumatic disease. So the lived experience is when you personally have your own experience as a part of the population. You can also have secondary experience. So, when you have a loved one, somebody close to you, a, when you're in meaningful relationship with people who are of a certain population, you can have a kind of experience that's sort of secondary, which is different from personal lived experience. Now, the topic of this conversation is about the value of lived experience in yoga teachers. And Jivana, you and I started chatting about this back and forth in text, and then we had a little conversation because you were looking for some teachers for certain topics, and we were thinking of like, not only who has professional expertise and experience in these areas, but who can also speak to it personally. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about why that's of value. Not that it's necessary, but that it has value.
Hmm. Okay. Hi. Um, hi everyone. I I just want to say I'm happy to be here and I have so many thoughts too. I didn't make notes and have an
I'll gu-
agenda.
I'll guide us. I've
But
got
I
an outline.
do,
You just speak
well,
from the heart.
I made them in my head though, so I don't even know where to start because I have so many thoughts about this topic
Mm,
actually, and some conflicting thoughts, honestly. I think that gosh, I guess I'll say this first that I mean accessible yoga basically started because I was teaching yoga to a lot of disabled folks, and I found that many of my students were unwilling to see themselves as a teacher. And so it was a question of self-perception, but also of accessibility. The trainings weren't accessible to them. And so I started accessible yoga as a first it was a 200-hour training for disabled folks to become yoga teachers. So that's how we started. And I ran that program for many years. That was in 2007 and starting. And it was really important to me, just like you said, that people that we shift that I think it's like a prejudiced view of what a yoga teacher is as this like perfect being, like a yoga teacher is someone who maybe is enlightened, who is also a gymnast and can just like do everything. So I really wanted to like change that mistaken idea, mostly because I have a lot of faults and problems, and I just wanted to like be okay with being a yoga teacher myself, and just like accept myself and the fullness of my humanity. And I was just tired of it. And also I saw it as a real obstacle, for teachers and for students, because I think, like you said, there is so much importance in the perception of yoga teachers in terms of the experience of the student. Like the way that the teacher presents themselves has such a huge impact on the experience of a student and whether or not they actually engage with yoga and take it on as a practice. And I think that this idea of this perfect yoga teacher is such an obstacle. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know how we got here, honestly, to that challenging problem of this like idealized being as the teacher, but I think it's a huge obstacle that needs to be addressed. So I mean, I'm grateful to you also for the work you're doing. I no longer do 200 hours, so I was just so excited to be involved with your 200-hour training and to see you bringing that issue back to the forefront of like, let's train people who maybe don't normally see themselves in that role. Right?
Yeah. So, you know, we you mentioned our 200 hour, which is launching this month, and our intention was to make yoga teacher trainings accessible, especially for people who are living with arthritis and chronic pain conditions, conditions that are associated with fatigue, with brain fog, that flare, where you can't necessarily, fly to a location and spend, 10 hours a day on a hardwood floor practicing, asana sequences again and again. And so the training structure itself is oftentimes a barrier. But I think what you're talking about too is the perception is a barrier. So we can make the training, our training is called Come As You Are. And that's the idea. It's like you show up, and if you're in bed with a heating pad, that's how you're showing up today. And still, there's this idea that people like me aren't yoga teachers. And even this misperception that to teach yoga, you have to be able to even do the things that you're teaching your students to do, right? I give the example of like an NFL coach. What NFL coach can actually execute the kinds of things that they are asking of the the players on the field? You
Uh,
can be an excellent teacher without actually executing the things that you're teaching.
I actually saw a post about that yesterday. I was shocked. A teacher I really respect actually posted like, you need to be able to do all the things first before you teach them. And I completely disagree with that. I think you're right. It's not even when you go to like the NFL. I think when you just think about it logically that, well, for me, I learned yoga from my grandmother and she was already, you know, an older adult at that time by the time she was teaching me. And she wasn't always teaching me asana. She did a lot of, she had a really interesting practice, but she was doing less and less asana as she got older. And so like I watched her like as my first teacher basically do less and less asana as she went into her 80s. And she wasn't less advanced. She wasn't less of a yogi. And I think that's where we're so stuck on this idea of asana, first of all, as the ultimate practice of yoga, which it's not. It's an awesome practice, but it's just one piece. And so I don't think that a yoga teacher has to be able to perform. I don't think that's necessary. And the other thing that's been on my mind regarding this topic, I'll just bring it up now, is that I think a lot of our ideas about how people learn are mistaken. I think that what I really like to focus on these days is what is the most ideal scenario we can create for yoga students So as teachers, our job is to serve our students and create a container and a culture that supports them in their growth and learning. And I don't think we talk about that enough. Like, what are the conditions that we need to cultivate as yoga teachers for our students to really grow and thrive? And I think that goes back to this question, the theme for today, which is like, it's based on our experience, right? Like, especially if we struggle or if we have a disability or a trauma or just an older person and we've had more life experience, I think we're actually probably more capable of creating a container that supports the growth of our adult students. By the way, we're also talking about adult learning. I think a lot of our ideas about teaching are based on teaching children, and that's just not how yoga is taught in my experience. Like teaching adults is a very different thing than teaching children. We don't need to like perform for them. We don't need to lecture at them. Adults learn in particular ways. There's some really interesting research, which you probably know about how adults learn. And one of the things that there's a few things that are important for adults. One is that they need to be self-motivated. There has to be something from in them that they are looking for. And they need to have specific goals. There needs to be a reason for them. Like, why are they practicing? So I think these are questions that need to come through our teaching. We can help our students find that. Like what is their motivation? What is their goal? Like bigger things than just getting in front of a big group and performing some fancy poses.
Yeah, that's so the field that you're talking about, Jivana, is
Yeah.
andragogy, right? We
Andragogy, I
often talk
know.
about it
I
as
actually know that word.
pedagogy, right? So pedagogy is teaching kids, but we talk about pedagogy all the time, and that's not even
Right,
what most of us are do. I actually do happen to work with kids who have arthritis as well, and it's,
right.
let me tell you, it's a really different yoga class. And isn't it interesting that our yoga teacher training programs spend very little time actually exploring how people learn? We're training yoga teachers to be teachers of yoga, right? And the vast majority of the content is about the yoga and not about the teaching.
It's a disaster. Honestly, I really think that it's the missing piece in the yoga world, which is training people how to teach.
Yeah.
There are specific skills we need, and beyond just andragogy, just generally speaking, there's skills that you need to teach yoga. First of all, you have to teach in line with the yoga teachings. Like your teaching has to actually be a practice of yoga. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's not something we think about very much. Like, how am I teaching? How is my teaching a practice? Am I practicing ahimsa? Period. Like, eh, you know what I mean? There you go. Like, am I practicing ahimsa in the way I'm teaching yoga?
For myself too, when
Yeah.
we're talking about teachers who are living with chronic conditions, and we had a live session on Monday about how do we practice self-care as teachers so that we're walking the walk and also, providing value for our students without diminishing ourselves in the process. But yeah, so that's just ahimsa, but there are all the teachings of yoga that we should strive to embody in the process of our teaching.
Right. I think there are a lot of skills that teachers can learn. Um, so it's a combination of things. Skills they can learn, but also, like you said, it's based on life experience. I think people that have had more life experience, and I'm not down on young people teaching, that's fine too. But I think what I think it is to me is that it's often the people who feel less secure about teaching who make the best teachers. It's people who are kind of maybe humble, insecure, um, shy, like people that are questioning themselves. I think that that's the person who ends up becoming a great yoga teacher because I think they bring that into the room. And so that when they're teaching, they bring their humility, they bring their shyness, they bring their lived experience. And I think other adults who come to learn from them respond to that and think, wow, you're treating me like an actual person. You're
So,
talking to me like I'm a person.
Jivana, can I ask you, you and I joke like we have so much in common, including like our birthdays are like exactly 10 years apart. So you've lived some life, you've had some experiences different from mine.
Yeah.
How would you say that your particular lived experience has been of value in your teaching?
Yes, I'm 10 years older than you. Uh, Um, I mean, it's everything. It's everything. Like, I honestly don't think that what's the point of me opening my mouth if I'm not trying to share something about my experience? Because otherwise you could just like go read a good book, like or read the Bhagavad Gita, read the sutras, or watch something on YouTube. Like, I don't know. What else is there except for me to share something that I've experienced? But I think what it is like when I'm teaching, I'm combining my knowledge of yoga with my experience of life. And so the way that I communicate, the way I articulate the teachings, I hope, are a combination of those two things. And I think one of the skills of being a good teacher is learning how to balance that personal and the kind of skill-based or information. And someone was just asking me about this the other day. A teacher was asking me, well, how do I teach when I'm not feeling well? Like, what should I do? What do I want to show up for my students, but maybe I've had some bad news or I'm feeling sick. I think that again is that balance, how it's finding the balance. It's always the middle path. Like share authentically and also be there and support your students. So for me, it's like I mean, you asked me a question. I would say for me, it's because I'm a queer person. I came, as a gay man, I came out in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. My experience of life has been like so impacted by the fact that in my late teens and then beyond, like for like that decade, like my 20s, my formative adult years were spent dealing with illness and death, like 100%. I had all my best friends died of AIDS. I lost so many people. I volunteered in AIDS hospice and worked for an AIDS magazine, and I was a reporter on AIDS treatments. And just my life was, I was an AIDS activist. I was marching in the streets, getting arrested. Um, and I met my husband through that process. So like so much of my life, my vision of the world was impacted by not just AIDS, but by illness and death. And that's what really inspired me to go deeper in my practice because I realized that spirituality isn't optional for me. Like I didn't really have a choice but to go right to spiritual teachings at that age as a way of surviving. Like I think a lot of people go to spiritual teachings when they're struggling or grieving, and that's what I did. But it was younger for me. Like I went there very young, and that's just where I've stayed. Like I just realized, and especially now as I get older, like there's really nothing else to do except to really reflect on the fact that my time is so limited. Each of us, we're all dying, and it's the big thing that we like to ignore. Um, and that these questions, these bigger life questions need to be addressed. And so for me, I'm always thinking about them like every day. I don't know. So yeah, so you asked how that's how my life experience impacted my teaching, and that I feel that spiritual practice isn't optional for me. It is the beginning. It's the first thing, not the last.
I think a lot of people who live with chronic conditions have a kind of similar confronting of mortality early on in life, especially when I work with kids who have rheumatic diseases or a lot of people who are diagnosed in young adulthood. A friend of mine who's been living with arthritis since she was 2 years old,
Mm.
she said, as her peers start to get older, they're going through things that she has already like been there, done that, that she has dealt with, like not being able to get out of bed in the morning, not knowing if you're going to be able to, like, walk a block on a given day, and,
Yeah.
all of the medical visits and all of the, like, what can I trust my body to be able to do? What, managing fatigue, the things that maybe happen for some people later in life. There's a reckoning with that is sort of forced upon people who are dealing with chronic conditions early on. Um,
Definitely. I mean, I cannot agree more. I think the wisdom of disability is profound and that the disability community is undervalued in terms of experience and the power and just like the impact disability has on our lives and in our culture. Um, and that's why it is important that there's more representation. Like you said, I think it's key. So when I hire teachers, that's what I'm always looking for. I always want people who have life experience. And when I train teachers, I'm always encouraging them to embrace that rather than to ignore it. Like there's always this sense of the yoga, again, with yoga teachers of trying to hide that. Why? Why hide your most powerful tool, the source of wisdom that you have?
so
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a leading question. I know what your answer is going to be, but I want you to elaborate
Okay.
on that. So the leading question is, do you have to have the same lived experience as your students? And so, of course, the answer is no, but can you say more about that?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good question because I would say no, you don't. Because for one thing, I don't get to pick my students. You know what I mean? I guess you could create scenario where you could select your students, but most of the time, that's not how the world works. You put yourself out there as a teacher, even if you're going to teach a very specific population, you still don't get to choose who comes to you. So in a way, you have to, well, what I always say is you need to train to be a teacher for everyone, but realize that you're not, that you'll be the teacher for the people who want to learn from you. Um, I don't know though. I have conflicting thoughts about it. I want to encourage people when I train teachers in accessible yoga, I always say, think about where you want to serve. You know, what communities do you want to reach out to? And then to really look at your life experience and think, do I have a personal connection with these communities? And then to try and serve within your local communities or those that you have connection with. Like if you have arthritis, can you teach other people with arthritis? Or if you've had cancer, can you teach people with cancer? Like there is really value in that connection and also realizing that in the end it doesn't really matter. So it's one of those like both and or like you know what I mean? Like both things are true because I think that it's more important that you're able to see people's humanity, that you can recognize that each of them is whole and full and complete, and that you see yourself in them when you're going to teach somebody, rather than that you have something shared. But it can help the student to see themselves reflected in you, right? It can support them in being open to what you're saying if they see some like, oh, you know how I feel, you know about this thing. So there is value in that. And yet I think it's also not necessary. Do you know what I mean? Is that confusing?
Yeah, so
Both.
I want to emphasize something about humility here because I think it's really important, Jivana, and you mentioned it a couple of times in this conversation so far. One is especially if you're going into a space where you do not share lived experience, that you enter that space with humility, which I would say, now I have decades of experience working with thousands of people who have various conditions of arthritis and chronic pain. And even though my lived experience of that is limited, I do have some, but I have exposure to a lot of life experience through the people I've worked with. But when I first started at the Johns Hopkins Arthritis Center, I was 20 something years old, like right out of a Master of Fine Arts in dance, marathon runner. Like I knew very little about the life of a person living with arthritis and chronic pain conditions, and I entered that space very aware of that. And I would say part of why I was successful, and I would never recommend this now, but I went in with like the basic integral yoga 200 hour. I did not know how to work with this population when I first started. Now there are a whole lot of ways to get that training, including hours. But I went in knowing that I didn't know what I needed to be able to work with them. And I expected to learn at least as much from them as they were learning from me. And I think they went in a little skeptical of me, honestly, because I was all of the things that the model of yoga is in our society, young, thin, white, able-bodied,
Yeah.
female, etc. And so it took time to earn their trust, and emphasizing some of the tenets of our teaching, which is really choice-based language and a curiosity and an exploration of what it means to practice this for each person in the room differently. And I think that humility was especially necessary for me as a person without lived experience. But even when people come in with lived experience is your experience. And so
Right.
I think the pitfall that sometimes happens for people with lived experience is assuming in general, right, is problematic. But like what works for you is not going to work
Right.
necessarily for whoever is showing up in the room. And so things when we talk about choice-based language, it's also being really careful about I statements, right? Like this works for me, or I find that it helps when I do this versus universal statements like this will or that does, it can, it might. And so softening that to not make assumptions or mandates in a
Right.
room, even when you do come with lived experience.
Totally. That's so important. I think that goes back to that earlier part of our conversation, which is like, are you practicing yoga in the way you're teaching, which is like, to claim your own experience as yours, to recognize that each of us, even though we're connected and the same, we're also unique and have a very individual experience. But I want to say like maybe something like the opposite idea too about what you were just saying, which is I think humility is also being able to say that I'm not the right teacher and that maybe I have someone else. I know someone, like be able to like give your power up, use your power for good, which is to say, or your privilege, especially like if you're not disabled or you're not an older person, or if you're not from that, whatever that community is that is requesting you to teach them, and you know someone who is, like, can you just say, oh no, I don't, that's not the right class for me. I know a teacher who could potentially be a better fit for you. Like to recognize this, that lived experience is important sometimes, meaning that it's not your place, and that we need to listen to voices from communities and actually lift up people from communities. So a lot of, like I said, accessible yoga started as that. Rather than I was going and teaching disabled folks and I continued to do it, but I realized that it would be so much better if they were teaching themselves. So like I wanted them to become the teacher. And some of my more experienced students, I basically forced them to do that. I mean, that's how we started. And like just what I'm saying is to kind of not think that we or that I individually have to be the one to fix everything. I don't have to be the one to hold everything and to be the teacher for everyone. That maybe there's someone there within that community that can do it better than me. So it's kind of a form of white saviorism. You know that concept, where it's like it's this idea, it's a colonial idea actually that like, white people come in and they fix. They created the problem, but also that somehow they'll be able to fix it. And that's just not true. I think we have to just like sometimes step back, or say, no, like I don't need to be the one doing that.
Okay, I want to bring up two things related to that. Thank you so much for that point.
Yeah.
And you are an excellent example of someone who uplifts others. And I think that has been a mission of yours all along. You have a reputation and a platform that you use to be able to shine light on people that are, doing important, valuable work in the world. And I really appreciate that about you. Um, One point that I want to bring up about that is the idea of intersectionality, and that, you know, nobody is unidimensional. Everybody in the room is showing up with a whole host of identity structures. And so, even for example, if you teach a queer yoga class that is a safe space for people from the queer community, there are going to be people who enter that space who have a lived experience that you do not share.
Right.
People who, have trauma that is different from yours, people who have disabilities, etc. And so even if you do come with lived experience, there are going to be aspects of a person's identity in your classroom that still require that humility of like, I don't know what it means. You don't know what it means to be, a queer Black woman, right? That is a whole, you share some identity structures and not all. And so, for example, I'm doing this research study now that is in a methadone clinic in the Bronx, and I bring some expertise of how to use yoga for chronic pain management that is valuable in that community. I also have some experience, not lived experience, but experience related to addiction. And so I bring what I know, but there's a whole lot that I will never know about what it's like to be a part of that community. And so I think that I can have value there for what I have experienced and what I do know. And still also there's a whole lot that I will never know about what it's like to walk in the shoes of my students.
Right. It's always it's complex, and I think it's not black and white, like you said. Well, it goes back to what you said before. Even if you do have some shared experience, it's not the same experience as your students. I think that as teachers, I think it's claiming your identity. That's what I always say. It's like become more conscious of your personal positionality in the world. Like, what are your identities? What places do you have privilege? What places do you not? What is your experience with everything? And that's your background, your race, your religion, ethnicity, your disability, everything. And the more you know yourself, I think the more you're able to be honest then when you move into that space about this is who I am. And can you find a way to share that without making the class about you? So it's like sharing yourself in an honest, humble way without it being your therapy session.
I wanted to go there next, Jivana. So
Okay.
finish your thought, but I want
Well,
to.
and I would say that it evolves too. So like for me, like working with one class, like I've had the experience over time where I came in and I taught for a while, and then after a couple of years, I found another teacher for them. Like I brought in someone to assist me eventually or sub for me, and then I eventually just turned the class over to that person on purpose because I just found that like I don't have to do everything. Like I can lift up other people and make a conscious effort to do so. And especially as you get to know a community, you can kind of get a sense of what do they need, and am I the one to do it? And we get stuck in a capitalist mindset of like, oh, I just need more. I need more classes, more students, more money, and it just that's a dangerous game as a yoga teacher. Although it's often the case that yoga teachers do need that, or yoga therapists even, I think it's important to know when to walk away or to say, this is not serving me or serving you at this point. Like, I'm not the teacher for you anymore, even though I was, or I'm not the right teacher now, whatever it is. That's another big piece to me is like just not saying yes to everything, to really reflecting on each group you teach and each person you teach and think about your relationship. And that's the other thing, one more thing, is about recognizing that you have a relationship with your students and that the teacher-student relationship is a really important relationship in the world, and it's something that needs reflection. Like just like any relationship you have, whether it's with your partner, with your kids, or your parents, or your friends, what is your relationship to your students, and how is that relationship working from both sides? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I there are a couple of things I want to come back to. One
Yeah.
is this idea of like not making sure that your teaching is not about you,
Yes.
right? So that you can show up authentically and share from your experience And it's not about you. You're showing up in service to your students, keeping your own cup full, making sure that you're practicing self-care, and it is an offering in service. And so, a guideline that we use in professional circles is that my self-disclosure is in service of my students. So it's not so that I can
Right.
brag or get something off my chest. It's because I'm going to share something that I think is going to support them in their journey, which I think is appropriate as a teacher, but especially yoga is a spiritual practice, and there is a sacredness to the relationship between a student and their spiritual teacher that I think requires an honoring of that even at a higher level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think well, you're getting to something important, which is that yoga is powerful and it's a source of tremendous power. That's why it's often abused, because power is abused. Our egos naturally are drawn to power. We want that for whatever reason. That's a bigger question, maybe, than for today. But I think as a teacher, you first need to recognize not only know yourself as best you can, but also really can reflect on your how you relate to power. Do you teach to get that or avoid it? Like you have it's really hard. You have to be comfortable with that power in a sense, but also use it consciously and for good. Do you know what I mean? Like use your power for good.
So this actually gets back to another point that I wanted to come to, Jivana, which is about mission alignment.
Yeah.
So, something that I have done a lot of work on and that I do some support of others with is declaring a personal mission statement, which is like,
Mm.
what is my own dharma in this world? And that may be a professional dharma, a personal dharma, it may be a chapter of life
Yeah.
or life as a whole. And so, and especially for somebody who tends to be a people pleaser and want to do everything for everyone, being able to hold up an opportunity and say, like, why am I here on this planet at this particular time? What is the best use of the limited energy that I have so that I am having the maximum impact with
Right.
my energy, which gets to what you were saying earlier of like maybe somebody else is better for this opportunity and knowing when that's true. But I think it also gets at, when you're talking about somebody with lived experience
Yeah.
being sometimes the more appropriate teacher for the job. So I have a personal lived experience of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder related to that. You and I have both lost our mothers. That was like a major. I am not called to teaching people with traumatic brain injury, even though I have navigated now, many years of like post TBI yoga practice. I am not called to like necessarily serving the cancer community, even though, that I have some experience there. I am personally called to change the way that we think about and live with chronic pain in the world. And it's like an enormous mission that all of my research, all of my yoga therapy, all of my yoga teaching is about how do we conceptualize life with chronic pain differently, live it differently, talk about it differently. And so that's a mission that I feel called to,
Yeah.
even though my experience of chronic pain is pretty limited. So I think that there is like knowing what you feel called to and considering how your lived experience serves that, but that's not the only marker of a fit, if that makes sense.
Yes. I agree. I think that not all of us are as evolved as you in terms of consciously having such a defined focus in our lives. I think most of us are just trying to make it through and do the best we can. Um, but I actually think so I think there's another way to look at that exact same thing, which is to talk about service and karma yoga. Because I
Yeah.
think having a service orientation is actually it's probably the answer to all the questions you brought up today. I think it's the through line for this conversation, which is that to be a yoga teacher is to be in service in the name of yoga and is to be practicing. karma yoga, to be practicing service. And what that the defining factor of that of service is that you're not attached to the results of your actions, meaning not that you don't care about them, but that you don't need a particular outcome in order to be happy. So you're not entering the role of teacher or the entering your classroom needing a specific result. And I think that's huge because I actually think we do that all the time. We either we want to be thanked, we want to be liked, we want the students to be fixed, we want them to feel better, we want them to come back. It's always the wanting, the desiring is the problem. So if we
It's a
can
klesha.
work,
It's attachment.
it is attachment. So if we can work on our attachments, which most of us don't really want to do, but if you can do that and you recognize that yoga teaching becomes a practice for working on yourself, for working on your attachments in the name of service, then all of the things work out. You become humble, you know how to share just enough because you'll just do it. It'll just happen. You're going to be sharing authentically because you don't have a particular outcome in mind. You have support yourself. You have to have a practice. You have to have a foundation, which could be, a regular meditation practice or an asana practice. It could be having a good friend to talk to. A peer support is probably maybe the number one thing you could have as a yoga teacher or yoga therapist. Someone you can talk to about your teaching and how you feel about it. Someone you can vent with about all of that stuff. So when you come into the classroom, you're there in service of your students and not in some kind of angelic way. Like you don't have to come in like floating. It's just that you can recognize what your desires are. Like what is it that you consciously or even unconsciously are looking for out of that experience of teaching? And that's where you get into trouble, I think. That's where you can actually become a great teacher is where you can overcome that just a little bit. Or even overcome, just see it. Like just see it. You just see that, you know what I mean? I've had so many experiences of students like I don't know, like either getting a bad review or not thanking me or not liking the class and like being distraught about it, like just being
Mm.
so upset that the student didn't. I mean, it still happens to me now if someone doesn't like my teaching, and I realize that's my work. That's what I'm here for. Like I am teaching yoga so I can learn about myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you've got to go and it's getting to time,
Yes.
but that the importance of having your own support system, personal and professional. One, it's having your own sadhana, your own yoga practice, which is doing the work, not necessarily the gymnastic work, although physical practice can be a part of it, but doing the deep inner work and knowing like what are the hard things that I don't necessarily want to look at because they're uncomfortable, that are really where the opportunity for growth is, and not doing that in a silo, which may mean having your own yoga therapist or
Yeah.
psychotherapist or spiritual guide,
Definitely.
etc. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely have your own yoga teacher or yoga therapist. I mean, I have a yoga therapist I go to. It makes a big difference for me. But I would just say, also, I just want to say, give yourself a break. Like, I don't want to end this conversation with anyone feeling overwhelmed or, I don't know, like, oh no, I can't do that. It's the opposite. Like, I would hope that this conversation was about making people feel supported and that they're okay. Like you're okay, you can be a teacher. Like you don't have to be a perfect being. I'm not, like by far. You might be. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Just like it's okay to mess up. It's okay to go in and make mistakes. I mean, it's unavoidable. Like I'm gonna say the wrong thing. I'm gonna be stupid and embarrass myself and maybe hurt someone's feelings too. Like that's just gonna happen, and it's okay to be a person and be a yoga teacher, right?
Yeah. And that's, part of wanting to have this conversation is because we have this 200 hour coming up for people with lived experience. And I think there can be a lot of barriers to like
Yeah.
seeing yourself as a yoga teacher And not that you have to take a yoga teacher training to be a teacher, right? A lot of people don't, but that like, the value in bringing who you are, the whole of who you are, um, in sharing the teachings of yoga is incredibly powerful. So thank you, Jivana. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I know that it's going to
Yeah.
be useful to a lot of people, existing yoga professionals and aspiring ones.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for talking to me and for all your great questions and for all your work. Really, it's amazing what you're doing. Thanks everyone for listening too.
Om Shanti.
Bye.